Hi, welcome back to Big Word Bible Studies. I'm Tanya Dennis, and this is our fourth video session in our study of 1 Kings. If you've missed any of our previous videos or the study guides, you can go to tanyadennisbooks.com. Under the Big Word Bible Studies tab, you'll find free PDF downloads of all of our homework and study guides. You'll also find links to all of our videos and our discussions on the blog there. You can also check out the YouTube channel, which if you're here on YouTube, then you already know where that is. So, all right, let's get started. We are in 1 Kings chapters 9 through 11 today. In our last discussion, we explored Solomon's temple and the palace that he built and the arrangement he had with Hiram of Tyre and all of the workers, everything that they did, all of the details of the furniture and everything. It was overwhelming, to say the least. Everything was covered in gold. There were pillars of cedar covered in gold. There was an ivory throne covered in gold. There were wood shields carved, intricately carved, and then covered in gold. There were lattices and pomegranates and all kinds of things. There were the pools and the baths and the candlesticks. Everything was covered in gold. So it was amazing, to say the least. So if you missed that, you'll have to go back and check it out. At the end of that section, Solomon and the entire nation of Israel gathered together at the new temple to dedicate it to the Lord. They had offerings and offerings and offerings, and they had this big, elaborate prayer that Solomon offered to God. It was a little over the top, honestly. It was very flowery and very, oh God, we love you and we want to do all of these things for you, and this isn't it wonderful that we've created this temple for you and this is all for you. And then Solomon went a little weird in his prayer about how we know we're going to fail, and so we need you to give us mercy, and we need you to do this, and we need you to do that. At the beginning of chapter 9 here, we have God's response to that. At the beginning of chapter 9, God appears to Solomon again, just as he had done before when he gave Solomon the choice of, if you can have anything, what do you want? And Solomon said, I want wisdom. And God said, that's great. I'm going to give you even more than what you've asked. This time, though, God reiterates a message that he's given to Solomon and to Saul and to King David and to the people of Israel many times before. And that message is, if you follow me, I will bless you. If you turn away from me, you're going to suffer. Now, this is not God being malicious in any way. He's not being sadistic. It is God being God. God is the authority, and he, like a loving father, is trying to train his children in the way that they should go. And he knows that the best way for Israel, for his children, the best way for them to go is to follow him. He knows what is best. He has infinite knowledge, while they have very, very limited knowledge, the same as us today. We have very finite knowledge, and his is infinite. And so what is best for us is to follow the one who sees all, and he sees all. So back in chapter 9, what God tells him is that, okay, this temple is great, and I like the temple, and I'm glad that you've built me the temple, and I'm going to dwell in the temple. However, you need to remember that you must follow me. So God reiterates this message, and there's no real recording of what Solomon's response is to God's appearing, but we then, in the rest of the chapter, see what else Solomon does with his kingdom. He fortifies cities, he fortifies the wall around Jerusalem, he builds storehouses for the military in the outlying cities around the borders of Jerusalem, and then he acquires wives, and he acquires gold, and he acquires lots of different things. He establishes trade routes, all of these good governmental things that a king should do for his country. And then in chapter 10, we have an interlude with the Queen of Sheba. The Queen of Sheba traveled 1,500 miles, likely from southern Arabia. She traveled 1,500 miles or thereabouts to get to King Solomon because she had heard so many wonderful things about him and about his kingdom. So she decided, well, I'm not going to believe it until I see it with my own eyes. She travels all this way, brings him more gold and spices and herbs, and she comes, and everything is as she had been told. In fact, it's even grander, it's greater, it's more elaborate and extravagant than she had imagined. When she leaves, she blesses God, not because she believes in God, but because it's an honorary custom to do. You would go into that country and you bless the God of that country. It's not the God of her, it's the God of Israel and the God of Solomon. So she blessed God, and then she blessed all of Solomon's people, raving about how wonderful it must be for them to sit under you all the time. You're so wise and you're so wonderful, and this must be a fabulous life for everyone who lives in subject to you. Solomon may have let that go to his head a little bit, or maybe his heart was already turned by his 700 wives. So in chapter 11, after we've read about all of Solomon's wealth and the extent of his kingdom and the awe that Queen Sheba had for him, then we read about what's really going on with Solomon. Last time we discussed how, building a great temple doesn't mean anything if your heart is not in the right place. And here we find that Solomon's heart may not have been in the right place. In fact, we know it wasn't, because he did exactly what God said not to do. Back in Deuteronomy 17, God gave very explicit instructions to the people of Israel about their king and about what their king was to do. It starts in verse 14, but then in verse 16 it is directed not to the people of Israel, but actually to the king himself. It says, "Only he must not acquire many horses for himself, or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses, since the Lord has said to you, you shall never return that way again. And he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away. Nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver or gold." Now, as we go through that list, Solomon ticked off every single one. He got lots of horses. Not only did he get horses, he got horses from Egypt. And he got lots of wives, the first one being from Egypt. He got lots and lots of gold. He had tons of gold delivered to him every single year. So this man built an elaborate temple for God, but his heart was not where it needed to be. Now, in chapter 11, we see more explicitly where his heart went. He had 700 wives and 300 concubines, and they drew his heart away from God. Now, when he brought them into his house, he said, okay, well, you can worship your own gods. Just, keep it quiet. And eventually they changed his mind and persuaded him, as women are wont to do. They persuaded him to build temples so that they could worship openly. And then they persuaded him to worship with them. And so not only did Solomon go against God's will, but he was while gradual, he was also very deliberate in worshiping other gods. He was very deliberate in going against God's will. This wasn't that was an accident, I'm sorry. No, he's building temples for false gods. He's building statues and idols for his foreign wives to worship. This wasn't really an accident. It may have been gradual, and he may not have realized how hot the water had gotten, but he was in hot water. And as is typical when you get in hot water with God, there are going to be consequences. Chapter 11 discusses, after we talk about Solomon's wives and his idolatry, it talks about how God raises up adversaries who will take the kingdom away from from Solomon. I keep doing that. I'm sorry. Will take the kingdom away from Solomon. Now, in our study, we talked not explicitly, but we did talk in detail about the different idols and the different false foreign gods that Solomon followed after. We talked a bit about these adversaries that were raised up, and you can get those details in the study guide. I don't want to go into those details too much right now. What I do want to talk about is the relevance for us today. Now, when we think of idolatry, we think of statues, and we think of foreign countries, and we think of ignorant people who don't know that God is real and that there is no God in a carved image before you. The problem is that idolatry is just as real for us in civilized countries as it is everywhere else, and as it was throughout history. Tim Keller said, "Idolatry is attached to everything. All of our bitterness, all of our impurity, all of our malice, all of our problems, everything that troubles us is a result of idolatry." And what is idolatry? It's taking a good thing and making it an ultimate thing. That's exactly what Solomon's problem was. There's nothing wrong with him taking a wife. I think it was actually okay in that time for him to take more than one, but did he really need 700? I don't think so. There was nothing wrong in him having gold in his palace or in the temple. But did he need that much? Did he need to spend so much energy on building this elaborate kingdom that really was bringing glory to him and not to God? And that's where we have the problem. That's where we have the idolatry. Yes, he was worshiping false gods, and it was very tangible and very easy to see. It was very visible that he was doing that. But we can do the same thing without bowing down to something or without offering sacrifices to something else. There are lots of things in our lives that are good, but when we make them the ultimate thing, we too are falling prey to idolatry. If we put more energy into, or more stock into, pursuing our careers or building the perfect family or building the perfect home or whatever it might be, whatever it is that we go to for our validation, that has become our God. Now, Matthew 6:21 says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Solomon had a problem with putting his treasure in the wrong place. Warren Wiersbe says that Solomon became more interested in prices than in values, in reputation than in character, and in the splendor of the kingdom rather than the good of the people and the glory of the Lord. Now, fortifying cities, again, I realize I'm repeating myself here, but this is very important. These weren't bad things that he was doing. It was that he took those things to an unhealthy extreme. He took these good things and made them ultimate, supreme things in place of God. Whatever we place in place of God, that becomes our new God. When God raised up adversaries, there was one in particular that God gave a vision to and told him he was going to be the next king. Word got out to Solomon, and Solomon, of course, was not happy, and he tried to destroy this person. When we are faced with our sins, we have two choices. We can either accept it and accept that God is wiser than we are, or we can fight it. I can guarantee you when you fight it, you will lose. We have two children. Isabel is almost 9 and Zachary is 7, and they are absolute opposites in almost every single way. Now, with one of them, when I give explicit instructions, this child will look me in the eye, do exactly the opposite, and then throw a giant fit when consequences come. The other child will know what the rules are, but if this child doesn't follow the rules, then consequences are expected. And if grace is exhibited rather than consequences, then we hear the cry of injustice. So the one cries injustice when this person disagrees with the rules. The other one cries injustice when we don't follow the rules. We have the same choices with God. We can acknowledge that he is the authority and what he says goes, or we can disobey him and then whine and cry and throw a big hissy fit because we think our rules should be more important and we think that what we think is better than what he thinks. Well, we're wrong because we're not God and he is. So my challenge to you, I have two challenges. One is remember that God is God. He's God and he is greater and he is bigger and he is all that matters. Number 2, when we are faced with our sins and when we recognize that our ideas and our plans conflict with his will and his purposes, how do we respond? First of all, who is our God? Is it really God, or do we have some superficial thing sitting on his throne? If so, then we need to fix it. And 2, when we recognize that we've stepped away from where he wants us to be, are we going to throw a giant hissy fit, or are we going to confess as King David did? Granted, it came a little late, but when he did finally recognize the gravity of his situation, he did confess and he asked for forgiveness and he tried to make it right. That's the type of heart I want us to have. I want us to have the type of heart that we know we're not perfect. We know that God is. And we know that when we make mistakes, God is willing and able to forgive and restore. So this is my challenge to you today. I want to thank you for joining me again in this Bible study. If you've missed anything, again, go to TanyaDennisBooks.com. You can check up on any of our past studies, any homework that you may have missed or study guides that you want to get, and the new study guide for our next few chapters should be up shortly. Stop by the blog, leave some comments, let me know what you're thinking and what it is that God is teaching you through this study, and I'll see you soon. Bye.